Tariffs have been a huge topic of conversation recently since the White House started imposing its tariffs. Many things have changed. I really feel like it's kind of like a day-to-day change on what happens with the tariffs. So with new tariffs going into effect recently, we wanted to bring you an update on what's going on and where things stand. And here to help us do just that is Merrick Masters with Wayne State University, an expert on the topic. Merrick, we appreciate your time this morning. So far, what is the timeline here? I know that these tariffs started months ago.
Briefly, you're breaking up on my microphone. I can't hear you.
How about now? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Let's get into it. So tariffs, what's the timeline? When did that first tariff go into effect months ago, and where are we at now?
Well, 6 months ago, you had the average tariff imposed on foreign countries importing the United States was under 3%. Now the average tariff is 18%. It ranges from a lot of countries having a 10%, what they call reciprocal tariff rate, which is in retaliation for what we consider to be unfair labor practices, to as high as 100+% with respect to China. That treaty is still being negotiated. In the case of Brazil, you have 50%. And in India, you have 50%. So there's a lot of variation. Trade is about 25% of the overall U.S. economy. In Michigan, it's higher than that. It's about 33%.
Wow. So a lot of things that can impact us directly. At this point, what you're seeing, what would you say is the biggest impact that we are seeing here when it comes to what consumers are spending?
Well, I think that the greatest impact so far is on cost. You need to distinguish between costs and prices. The importer pays the tariff. So companies like Ford, Stellantis, General Motors, they pay the import tariff rate increase. And businesses so far have absorbed most of the tariffs. So that lessens the impact on consumers. There are estimates that prices will go up this year about 1% to 2%. That could affect the average household by about $2,000 on average. But I think it's important to remember that that depends on how the costs are passed along to the consumer, and there's a lot of debate about that. Remember that imports are only 13% of the overall U.S. economy. And businesses have a lot of tools they can deal with in order to deflate the increased costs of higher tariffs.
And what avenues of our economy currently would you say we've been able to see that impact of cost versus price, with the price actually going up?
Well, I think that's most likely in such areas as clothing and in consumer electronics when the import tax takes effect. Those things are going to go up more than in other areas. There's a possibility that food could go up, particularly with respect to certain states that depend heavily on imports. But I think so far, for example, in auto prices, it's been muted because companies have absorbed a lot of the costs and they have ways of shifting the costs away from the consumer.
I think my follow-up question to that is, I guess, how long are companies able to keep up with shifting that cost away from the consumer? Obviously, that can't be a long-term strategy, is it? Or are they going to have to, at some point, raise prices?
Well, remember that tariffs are one-shot deals. Then it gets baked into the cake. For example, Walmart, suppliers provide about 2/3 of the goods that Walmart sells in the United States. What they're doing is they're training on their suppliers on how to source things so that they can avoid the import tariffs.
Interesting. There is a lot of things, I believe, still up in the air. I know that, some of these deals have been kicked down the road a little bit. What is still up in the air right now? Anything that could change here in the next little bit?
Well, Mexico's still up in the air. China's still up in the air. I guess in a theoretical sense, everything is up in the air. But it's really important to remember that this is the biggest reset in trade that we've had in well over a century. And that Trump, by using deadlines, although he gets criticized for not being able to negotiate things more quickly, remember back in his first term, it took 4 years to negotiate the revision in the NAFTA agreement. What he's trying to do is jumpstart that process and get things done in a very short period of time. So he's got several deals done with several countries in a very short time period, 6 months, and I would expect that you'll see something come with China in the very near future, which is our third largest trading partner.
Are there any deals that are currently happening right now, maybe some expectations that economists have that consumers should be aware of?
Well, I think certainly anything that with regard to Mexico, Mexico is our largest importer, and China. That obviously is something that we need to be very aware of. So these are very large economies. And also, there are certain things with respect to the US agreement with Japan and the European Union that haven't been finalized. Those things could have a significant impact, particularly on certain sectors like auto.
Yeah, let's talk about the average consumer out there. Is there anything that you want to flag for them as we continue on this path of different tariffs and the different deadlines that we've seen come and go? Is there anything that you want them to be looking out for when it comes to the tariffs and how that could impact their wallet in the future? Or
Well, they should watch retail prices and see how much their retailers are raising the prices that they're charging, and then shop accordingly. Look for alternative sources if the prices are increased too much. And a lot of the trade that occurs at the individual level is very small. People order clothes from Chinese-based companies, and before they didn't have to pay a tax on anything under $800 in a package, but now they do have to pay a tax on that. So they need to be mindful of those kinds of things. They will have to pay that tax, and they should watch prices carefully to see whether they inch up and what choices they have in the market to make substitutions.
yeah, what key things should we be watching in the months ahead?
Well, in terms of specific product items, I think I would watch the big ticket items of autos, steel, and aluminum, and those things that go into computer-based products. I would watch that very much, particularly those that depend on semiconductors. And other things, food and clothing, the basic staples of life that we need or that we enjoy, those things I think we need to want to keep an eye on and shop accordingly to the extent that we can. One of the things that the objective of Trump's policy in this regard is to change business behavior and consumer behavior. And that's disruptive, but that's by design. It's not by accident.
Yeah, absolutely. As it relates to Michigan, obviously you spoke a lot about the auto industry. That's one of our main industries here in the state. How is it impacting the economy here? I mean, is it, if any, impact so far?
Well, trade is 33% of the Michigan economy. Imports are 24% of the Michigan economy. So anything that affects prices or the cost of products that are imported is going to have an impact on businesses and consumers. In addition, exports are a major source of business. Exports provide about 220,000 jobs in Michigan. And in an area such as yours, Grand Rapids, the metropolitan area, the economic benefits that exceed about $6 billion.
And I just have one final question for you. You teach this on a regular basis. You talk about this, you analyze this stuff. What sort of things do you look at when you're looking at the big picture here and the historic level of these tariffs? How do you take all that's going on right now in the current events and translate that to students that you might be teaching?
Well, I try to put it in the context of the overall economy, the overall international trade that occurs as part of the economy, and also the impact that will have on businesses, particularly by sector. The effect is differential because there are sector-based tariffs and there are reciprocal tariffs. And there are other trade barriers that are important to consider that are being addressed by this that will take longer term to address. But I also try and say this is a reset. This will be disruptive, but change by nature is disruptive. And for once, I would say that we're seeing a focus on, instead of capital being the beneficiary of trade, now there's a desire to put labor at the forefront, and that workers will have a stronger role to play in what trade policy we have.
All right, Merrick Masters, we have to leave the conversation there. From Wayne State, we appreciate your time and your insight on this ever-changing process. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me this morning. You have a good day.